Welcome to Yelling Into the Void, a podcast discussing and exploring topics in World of Warcraft. I'm Tevin. I'm here as always with Scott. And Scott, I'm really starting to think that maybe we should take 2 weeks off more often because it's almost like the devs just knew and then they decided they wanted to release everything about season 2 while we were gone. So,
yeah, but
what do you think?
They did it like the day after we've published our episode again. So it's like we published our episode, we're done for the year. It's like, oh, maybe we'll get some news so we have some stuff to talk about coming back in the new year. And then that Thursday, I think it was the 22nd or something. It was the Thursday before Christmas. And they just dumped all of 11.1 information for us. And I was like, fuck, we just took a break.
Well, what I will say is at least we have a lot to talk about today.
That is true. We have a whole lot to talk about. Yeah.
Well, I guess let's just jump in, kind of do a quick little rapid fire of all of the things that's news here, and then we're just going to dive right in, kind of cut the news section, I think, a little bit shorter this week so that we can actually get into the details of a lot of the stuff that's here.
Because I think the whole episode is the news, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, Happy New Year to everybody who plays WoW. Here's pretty much everything that's happened since 2 weeks ago to now.
I'm sorry, I know you didn't mean it this way, but like by saying Happy New Year to everyone that plays WoW, it's like, and if you don't, fuck you. No Happy New Year to you.
Actually, you're still in 2024. Don't come to 2025. We don't want you here. But a bunch of things happened. So starting off with Mythic Plus, because that is Scott and I's primary way to interact with this game. There is dungeon tuning that's been coming out and been data mined. It hasn't actually been play tested yet. More on that later. That'll start tomorrow. It will have started yesterday for you guys, but tomorrow for us.
Correct.
The tuning is weird. There's like actual tuning. There's slight reworks for things that are going to be in the season 2 dungeons. So that's the first thing. There's also steps definitely in the right direction for the Mythic Plus system, namely around like depletion and reworked affixes that I'm still not 100% sure exactly how they work. So maybe we'll go into a little bit more detail on that next week. KSM reward changes, kind of. Dinars are going to be added into this next season.
Sort of.
Yeah. All of this needs more elaboration, but at least to give you guys an idea on what we're going to be talking about, I just kind of wanted to rapid fire this. Also, we got all of the information for all of the tier sets that are going to be in season 2.
And sure did.
They're different. They're very different from what we've come to expect from tier sets. And I think that Scott and I have a little bit to talk about on this, but different maybe in a good way, but maybe also kind of sad.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot to talk about there for sure.
And then the biggest thing that I wanted to bring up that we probably aren't going to talk about a lot, but it's something that we've been like wanting forever. AUG has finally been nerfed, I think probably to the point of not being 100% meta in Mythic Plus dungeons.
Yeah, we'll see.
Tank threat buffs. That was just kind of like a one-off post from Wowhead. It seems like that's meant to more or less focus on raid tanking, so tanks aren't yoinking threat back and forth so much. But that will help with Mythic Plus in scenarios where the tank goes in, pulls a bunch of stuff, and then your Fury Warrior presses all their buttons and then dies because they pressed all their buttons and died. So there's that. And then the last two things, Plunder Store comes out soon, TGP comes out soon, and then changes have been made for Cersei's Circlet that we haven't talked about. They happened literally like the day after we had our last podcast, and they like addressed a lot of the concerns that we had and things that we thought were stupid. Mm-hmm. All of that's been fixed. So if you've been playing the game, you already know this, but for those who don't play the game, but more or less listen to the podcast, we'll talk about those for a little bit.
I'm the only one playing this game in the entire world right now. So I think that's most people.
That is fair. All right, Scott. I know it was fast. Did I miss anything?
No. I mean, we learned a little bit about the raid. I mean, we got some names of the raid bosses. I think we can spend some time on that in a later one because the raid testing is coming up. So we're going to actually kind of know some raid stuff. We got a little bit about the drive system, a little bit about the zone, and the delves and things like that. But I think that's I think you covered everything that is the big stuff that we want to talk about now.
Yeah, there was also some dungeon tuning. I think it came out today around the new Goblin dungeon too.
Yeah. So okay. So essentially, what has happened is they released a PTR build, like we said, the week before Christmas. This build was not live; you could not go in and test anything. But along with that, they released all their dev notes, and then it also allowed Wowhead to do a bunch of data mining. So Wowhead data mined all these dungeon changes like the day after they came out, and they've just been slowly releasing their articles on them over the next past 2 weeks in order to give them content to publish every day. So, yeah, there was a post today about the some data mine changes about the new zone. But that's stuff that was just in the PTR build that came out. Like, so it's not anything they've pushed new.
Yeah. It's also not anything that will really have any impact or any sort of meaning to any players, right? It's only going to be people who have done testing on that beforehand that are even going to know what these changes mean
Yeah,
for the new dungeon, at least.
like, I guess we can start on the dungeon changes. Maybe that's like
Yeah.
the place to start here because
Sure.
I mean, I think that's true just broadly across the board. Like, I think there's been a lot of reaction to these data mined changes, a lot of it negative reaction to these data mine changes for all these new dungeons. And I want to just kind of be the voice of reason here that this is PTR data mined stuff. No one has played any of this. No one has seen it. The balance is like they're adjusting things based off of how they currently were. So like it's an apples and oranges thing. Like you can't look at how they've adjusted these things from like a numbers tuning perspective and say like exactly, oh, they haven't learned their lesson from the last season. I think it's too early to tell that. Not saying that won't end up being the case.
Yeah.
Certainly could. But I think I saw a lot of posts around the internet over the holidays that season 2 is going to be awful because they haven't learned anything, and I just think it's too early to tell on that front.
Yeah, I also think that that's not entirely fair to the devs because they're showing that they have learned stuff. Maybe not around balancing, but they're showing that they are at least listening. I mean, not only the crest changes that happened a couple weeks ago and the changes for crafted items that happened a couple weeks ago, but also with the key depletion and the KSM rewards and stuff like that. I think that they are listening. They are learning. It's just, it's going to take time, and something sweeping is likely not going to happen until at least midnight, if not, well, midnight the expansion. If not,
Midnight tonight.
the
You have until
following.
midnight, Blizzard. Get your shit together.
But yeah, so I don't know. I don't really like the sentiment that they aren't learning. I will say though that Scott, I reading through these, and I focus mainly on the dungeons that I've done before because I have something to compare it to. Then, it seems like most of the changes, at least that I've read, and again, this is a blanket statement. It's not 100% accurate for everything, but it seems like they're mainly nerfing bosses and nerfing boss abilities, but buffing trash in different various ways. And really, like the one that stuck out to me is like confusing and weird that they're changing is Motherload, because I know you didn't play in BFA
Yeah.
for Mythic Plus, but the way that this dungeon worked is you got like all of your count in the first 2 areas, and then you just skipped the third area, like invis pots, and skipped around some of the mobs. And that's because those mobs in that last area are absolute ass. Like they are not fun to fight at all. And it's sounding like some of the mobs in the first and second areas, and even the second boss is going to be somewhat annoying to fight now. So I almost wonder if the routing for this dungeon is just going to like wholly and completely change.
Yeah, I again, you're right. I have not played this dungeon, at least not in a Mythic Plus setting, so I don't know anything about it really. But you telling me that the strategy was get most of your count in the first 2 areas and ignore the third area. That just seems like the type of thing that Blizzard's going to want to be like, I don't want you to do that.
Yeah.
And so they're gonna make adjustments that seem designed to prevent that kind of behavior from happening.
Mhm.
Um, and that, I mean, that's kind of the one dungeon I did play a lot that I saw the changes for was Mechagon Workshop, and they made a lot of changes to this dungeon, specifically to some of the bosses. The biggest change that they made was to the first boss, which was really honestly like a really dumb boss encounter. It was a two mob boss encounter where the tank just took one mob off by itself, and then everyone just zerged down the other one as quickly as possible, and then basically the fight's over at that point and you switch to the second mob and you can kill it at your leisure. They are making that go away. You have to kill the two bosses at the exact same time, but they're making adjustments to the AoE damage that's done by one of them to kind of make that a little bit easier. And that's like, I look at that and was like, that's good, because that was a stupid fight that wasn't fun. It wasn't like difficult, but it just wasn't fun.
Well,
And
and you just have like random moments of like intense damage that like almost felt unhealable at some points, depending
yeah,
on your class, and you just die.
yeah, the flame jet's damage was really, really rough. And it's not like they got rid of healing checks on that fight. They got rid of flame jets doing damage, but they added a AoE damage thing. I think the other mob is going to occasionally do like a slam now. That's just going to do AoE damage. So like they don't
Mm.
want to take away healers needing to heal, obviously, on in boss encounters, but I think something as stupid as like the reason why you just zerged the tank down as quickly as possible, then switch to the other guy, is because the flame jets on the tank hurt so bad. And you basically, it was a race between whether your healer was going to run out of cooldowns to deal with those. So you just killed as quickly as possible. It was a stupid fight. I am completely fine with them fixing it. So I'm not like excuse me. I'm not freaking out about any of these. Like, yes, it's very possible this thing's going to be incredibly overtuned and stupid. Yes, it's possible that mobs will still be doing too much white damage, and tanks will still be getting hit too hard, because I think that is one thing that people are disappointed about. I think some people, myself included, expected them to not reverse their tank nerf plan from the beginning of the season, but walk it back a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in anything that they released over the break that says they're going to do that. Now, does that mean they're going to that's not true? No. Like, yes, they did not make any specific changes to tanks to up their survivability, up their self-sustain. They didn't do any of that. But they could have adjusted things within the dungeons to just smooth out the damage a little bit. Like, there's two different knobs they could choose to tinker with if they want to walk back their decision there. We haven't seen one. That doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't done the other.
hmm So, a quick question for you, because I actually haven't looked into the workshop changes at all.
Mhm.
Did they do anything about the? I'm going to call it a gauntlet. It's not really a gauntlet, but the like mini game part before the third boss.
No. It's
Okay.
still there.
Well, I have honestly like we've had this dungeon in Mythic Plus so much that it isn't like an issue for me anymore.
Yeah.
It's frustrating that there is a point of like reset essentially within the dungeon that has nothing to do with anything other than character movement.
I
I don't
think they
know.
like that kind of stuff though. Like, I mean, if you look at the dungeons that they continue to design, a lot of them have this non-combat traversal type moment in them. They like that stuff. They like putting in the dungeon. And I don't
Yeah.
hate it. Like, I do think in a dungeon it gives you something to do besides just to pull mobs, kill mobs, pull mobs, kill mobs. I do think in a timed setting, it is one of those things that can get incredibly frustrating when one person is struggling with it and others aren't. I would like to see, like, the thing that I liked about the mega dungeon in Dragonflight is they had one of those, but they also had like
Skip.
a skip. If you were just really, really bad at it, you get enough people to do it. I don't think the Mechagon Workshop has anything like that.
It does not. And uh, I don't know if it needs it, because it's like it's done way quicker than the
It's
one that
not
was
that
done.
it's not
Yeah.
that hard. It's just
Yeah.
when you're racing against time, you always feel a little bit more pressure.
Yeah. But anyways, that was the only question I had. There's other bosses in Mechagon that I think, like Cujo. Are we still going to be able to box cheese Cujo by positioning correctly?
I don't know, because one of the things they did do was they nerfed Cujo's the jump damage a little bit.
hmm
so it won't do as much damage on jump anymore. And that leads me to believe that maybe we won't be able to box cheese, and that's why they're scaling the damage down a little bit, because they know you're not going to be able to do that. So I don't know. We'll see. This is all kinds of stuff that we're going to have to kind of figure out as we go. And interestingly, the way they are doing the testing of the Mythic Plus dungeons this season, it's going to be a little bit before we have the answer to that particular question. I don't know if you looked at the testing schedule.
Mm-mm.
Um, Essentially, the testing is open beginning tomorrow, the 7th of January, and it will be open for a week. Well, okay, it's going to be open for the next 6 weeks, but each week we'll be testing a specific dungeon or set of dungeons. So
Okay.
this first week of testing is only Operation Floodgate, is only the new dungeon.
Mhm.
Then week 2, they're going to do all of the War Within dungeons that are going to be in the season. Then week 3, they're going to do all the legacy dungeons, so Mechagon, Workshop, Motherlode, and Theater of Pain. Then week 4, they're going to do the War Within dungeons and Floodgate. Then week 5, the legacy dungeons and Floodgate. And then week 6 and beyond, it will be all of the dungeons. So they're kind of doing it piecemeal. I think it's smart because they want to make sure they get sufficient testing on each dungeon. And if you just have 8 dungeons, you might not get as much. And obviously, the skewed most towards the brand new dungeon that they've got no testing data for at all.
Yep.
It does kind of also reinforce our timing of when this patch is going to come out, by the way, because if we have 6 weeks at least of Mythic Plus testing coming, then once again, we're looking at end of February, most likely March.
Yeah, and I don't, again, they can't release before that. Not only because TGP, but now they've also had out this schedule, the 6-week schedule. So like it has to at least go 6 weeks.
Yeah. Yep.
So all right. Dungeon changes aside, Scott, I think that there's a lot more to Mythic Plus that I think matters more than just these like speculation on the dungeon changes.
Yes.
So the main thing that I think, let's just talk rewards first, because that kind of covers both the KSM changes and the key depletion changes. So starting with the KSM change, when I initially read this, I was kind of annoyed because the way that I personally have used KSM in the past is it's something that is achievable for me week 1, if not week 1, week 2, and it gets me a heroic tier piece, just 100% heroic tier piece of my choosing in the slot that I want.
Yeah, so let's step back here. The change you're referring to here is there was a achievement for either getting AOTC, getting KSM, or I think it's 1600 rating. I don't PvP, so I don't know. And that feat of strength would give you a heroic tier piece of your choice. The change in season 2 is instead of giving you a heroic tier piece of your choice, that achievement will just give you a slot in the catalyst, a charge. You will get a catalyst charge instead. So yeah, your point here is that KSM gives you a deterministic piece of loot, and now it essentially will not. You have to get something to drop. You have to get a heroic piece to drop first before you can use your KSM reward on it.
Which theoretically, if you have KSM or you have AOTC or you have 1600, you have gotten hero pieces. Like that's kind of the requirement.
Or
is
you're
to have
doing
done
content that drops heroic pieces. Like
Exactly.
you're still at the whims of RNG.
I think that what this does though, and the more I think about it, I think that this might be a better system. It feels weird to me because like I said, you guarantee get a choice of a tier piece you don't have currently, but it's going to change to where now if somehow you find yourself with a mythic piece or a myth piece to season 1 that is a tier slot, well, now you can get a myth tier piece, which that's cool, but does that really help? I don't know. I keep flip-flopping back and forth on if this is a good change or not. I want to say it is, and I want to say that the majority of people aren't even going to notice the difference here, and it's just going to kind of like be whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to think of like the people who push KSM quickly and used to use that as like a boost in power, if this is ultimately going to be better or more fall flat for them, if
Yeah,
that
I mean,
makes sense.
I just on my monk a couple weeks ago experienced a thing where I had done so many dungeons and just not gotten pants to drop ever. Like I just for whatever reason pants would not drop. And I was okay with it because I knew, hey, I'm about to hit KSM, and the second I get KSM, I get heroic pants done. That gear spot is covered. So from that perspective, it's a bad change. I think their developer reasoning for it, and I do think this makes sense, is with all of these gearing systems around the tier tokens, this was the only way you would acquire tier tokens anymore. This kind of tier token anymore, and it was kind of just a little clunky. That it's like you get this token in the mail, then you have to go to these random vendors in this place, then you have to spend it, and it's like how many people have accidentally bought the PvP one instead of the PvE one because they just didn't notice. And it is just kind of a little clunky and weird. And just giving you a catalyst charge is much neater. It's simpler. It's easier to understand. And I understand why they wanted to make that change. I am a little bummed that now I'm reliant on RNG a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, to your point, RNG is fickle, and in some ways it will screw you over, and in some ways it will benefit you because yeah, you manage to get up to a 10 your first week, you get KSM, uh, you pop your vault, and it's a myth track item, and you're like, oh, I can catalyze this right now,
Yep,
and I'm set. So yeah. I mean, I think it is cleaner, it is neater, and I think in 2 seasons we're not even going to remember the
correct.
way it used to be.
Yeah, I think we have to call this out because it was something that was initially not very clear, but this is only getting you one catalyst charge.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
this was first released to note or released in notes to the wider public, it sounded like you were going to get a charge for each of the things you did, but this is still a feat of strength. It is still completed on either KSM or AOTC or 1600. You're only getting
yeah.
one total out of this. So,
They worded it poorly and it confused people, and they fixed the wording pretty quickly. But there were a lot of people who were like, "Oh, I don't like this change," but the fact that I can get 2 pieces now, that's pretty cool. But no, that's not
yeah.
the case. So yeah,
And then the other reward change for Mythic Plus is I want to say I don't have it pulled up right now. I want to say it's at 2850 rating, something
correct.
like
Yeah,
that. You are getting a reward that essentially makes it so that your keys will no longer deplete below a 12. So you have to have gotten a key that is a 12 or higher, and it will no longer deplete below a 12. Now, that also includes your key in your vault. So if you don't play the game for a couple weeks, your key goes down one level every week you don't play when you loot it from your vault. It will not go below a 12 if you have a 12 or higher in that vault. So you will always, at a base, be starting at a 12, assuming you had one from the previous week. Now, this system is a little bit weird because it's like a one step in the right direction for depletion, but it doesn't really solve the problem,
well,
is
so
my take on it.
yeah. So this is so funny because here's what happened. What happened was depletion has been this thing in the Mythic Plus community that we've all been talking about. Everyone's been talking about. Is depletion a good thing? Should we get rid of depletion? Should there be something we do to just carve this negative penalty out of the game or not? And then we open patch notes and we see something that says, "Hey, if you get to this score, your keys don't deplete anymore." And to be fair, it was confusingly written at first, and it was not clear exactly what it meant. There were some people, myself included, who the first time I read it thought it meant once you get this achievement, any key below a 12 will no longer deplete, meaning you could die on an 8 20 times in a row and your key would still stay an 8. That's not what it means. No, what it means is any key that you have above that 12 or above will never deplete below 12, and that's it. So we all saw this and thought, Blizzard is finally addressing the depletion problem. And that is not what this is at all. This is simply another reward that they've thrown onto the track, another thing to chase for that is kind of neat. in that you're absolutely right. If you are pushing keys, you'd never have to worry about, like, they've declared 12 as this cutoff between low keys and high keys. And so if you're a pusher, you never ever for the rest of the season have to worry about ever doing a key below a 12 if you don't want to.
Hmm.
That's all it is. That's all it is. It is not addressing depletion problems at all. It is just a little breadcrumb and reward for people pushing higher keys. And the problem was that people didn't think it was that. The problem was people thought this is them addressing the depletion problem, and then realized quickly that no, it wasn't. And then everyone was mad because it's like, what are you doing? You said you were going to address the depletion problem. It's like, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. This is a completely different thing. This is a bone that they threw to give you one more. Like, Tevin, this is something we have been asking for. We have been
Yep.
asking for achievements and rewards on stepping stones post 2500, and this is them doing that. It's like, well, what can we give them for this? Well, we did the portals already, we did the tier, so why don't we just do this quality of life adjustment thing?
The
And
other
that's
thing
all it
is,
is.
this is also showing them doubling down again at the like cutoff at a level 12 being the higher level keys and below 12 being the lower level
Yeah,
keys.
which is very
So,
funny because this would have been a great achievement to put in season 1, where 12s were like this huge jump up in difficulty. With the affix changes that we're going to get into in a sec, that will no longer be the case.
yeah.
They're still going to be more challenging, but it is not going to be this like clear jump where it feels like 2, 3, 4 key levels harder than what you were doing. It's just going to
Mhm.
feel maybe 1.5 key levels harder, to, a much more gradual slope. So again, it's just a neat thing, and it's something to chase. It's like, I know I will chase it even if I'm not going to necessarily use it. It's like, ooh, there's an achievement I can get. Okay, I got to make sure I'm getting 2850.
So, the thing that I want to say about this is it's weird because the people who aren't going to get this are going to be the ones who probably need it the most. And the people who are going to get this are likely not really going to reap the benefit of it much, if at all. Like, we're targeting a very specific audience of people who get 2850 and then are continuing to struggle in the 12 to 13 range. But the majority of people who are going to get 2850 are going to probably exceed that and then go past the level at which this is going to be super useful.
Yeah.
And the people who are struggling to get 2850 are the ones who are struggling to get the 12s.
Yeah.
So this isn't, again, this is all just a long-winded way to say 100% backing what you just said. This isn't a solution to anything.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the exact wrong way to look at it, and like, because that's the thing. That's the question I was asking myself as I read this. Is like, who is this for? Like,
Mhm.
who is this for? And the answer is, well, it's not really for anyone. Actually, it's just like a fun thing that they threw in there.
Yeah.
I think the thing that the people that get this achievement will benefit more than the the key depletion part is the weekly vault key depletion part.
Mhm.
Like, just the idea that I can quit the game for 2 weeks and come back, and I will not have to pump my key up back to the 12 and up range.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be more of a benefit for most people. But yeah, it's just a thing they threw in, and it is kind of unfortunate that it made people seem like they were not addressing or doubling down on the depletion thing that people do see as a problem, and we've talked about as potentially a problem. But
Yeah.
that's not the solve here. And I think any change in depletion would probably come from a bigger Mythic Plus overhaul / revamp that I just don't think we're going to see mid expansion. So
The other thing to note here is if you take your key that is a 12 to Lindormi or to the Keystone NPC and you ask them to lower it below a 12, it will then start depleting again.
yeah,
Like
mm-hmm.
it just stops at 12.
Yep,
It
that's
doesn't
it.
stop you below 12. It doesn't stop you above 12. It only stops you at 12. So if you
Correct.
ask to lower it and you fail that 11, you will have a 10.
But that's your own
So
fault, because why would you ever do that?
so just keep all of that in mind. Like, this is not a complete failsafe. I guess the only other thing that we haven't really talked about for Mythic Plus is affixes. And I'm going to be honest, Scott, I need to pull up the Wowhead article on this because I almost forgot 100% what they're doing here. The thing of note that really stuck with me is the Keystone Level 12 affix. But as far as the actual like Xaloteth bargain affixes, I don't 100% remember everything they did there.
I got you, man. I
And
got you. I'm a pro. I got
the
all this memorized.
did we do any changes to the death affixes?
That is, I mean, I think that's the place to start before we start about what they've changed with the Xaloteth's bargain and Xaloteth's guile. We can say the one thing they have not touched at all is the Challenger's Peril
Yeah.
affix, which is the level 7 deaths cost. What is it? 30 seconds?
15
15 seconds
seconds.
instead of 5 seconds. No changes to that one. Pretty surprising. Again, doesn't mean that there won't be changes in the future. We're still early in the PTR cycle. Maybe they're holding, maybe they're waiting to see what the first couple weeks of testing look like with their timer set as they are. And if they, I am surprised though. I am surprised that that was not addressed at all. I thought for sure, that there was probably going to be a bigger affix and Mythic Plus revamp coming with an expansion, but getting rid of that very unpopular on death affix at the 7 level was something I thought for sure that they would do, but they have
Mhm.
not. They have not.
Well, that's a little bit sad. And that's, I wanted to say that they didn't do anything, but I didn't want to be completely wrong on that.
No, you're right.
So,
You're
yeah.
right.
So, the other changes that they did, though, I think some of them were pretty good. So, I think the main thing to note here is the change that they did at level 12, which essentially made it to where this like huge increase in difficulty that happened from 11 to 12 is not really there. Like there's
Correct.
still an increase in difficulty. It is still going to be harder to go from an 11 to a 12 than it is from a 10 to an 11, but it isn't that much harder and then some. Like
Yeah.
they essentially removed the flat increase and just made it so that any key at a 12 and higher scales faster.
Yeah.
Is really all they did.
Yep. So every key level scales by 10% um, as you move up in the key levels. And that, of course, scales exponentially, right? Because that's how that's how that kind of curve works. And they've just taken out that flat increase, which used to be, did it start at 20% and then they
It
nerfed
was
it down to
insane. Yeah,
10? Yeah,
20%.
it was fucking insane. They've completely taken that out, and now just keys 12 and above will scale more aggressively.
Mhm.
Which is going to make them harder. It's going to make them harder because they'll scale more aggressively. Also, the Xaloteth's bargain benefits that you get, which are benefits, like they are noticeable benefits, those will go away. So those keys are going to be more challenging, but it is going to be much less of like a freaking brick wall that you
Yeah.
have to find a way to get over. The ramp into high keys will be much smoother, and I like that. I'm happy for that change. I think it's good.
Yeah, I think that the main thing to talk about here though is if you were somebody who was pushing high keys prior to this season and then you found yourself struggling on 12s, I don't think that you're going to have that same problem going into season 2. I
Correct.
think you'll be able to complete 12s, maybe even 13s, maybe even 14s, but you will very quickly come up to your wall
Yeah.
because they are they're essentially doubling the rate at which keys scale past 12, right? So every keystone level will essentially be 2 keystone levels higher or something like that, right?
I haven't done the math about what a 2% increase shakes out to on the exponential scale, but
Oh, if it's only 2%, then
yeah, it's scaling from each key scaling at 10% per key level to 12% per key level.
for some reason I thought it was going to 15%. I don't know
No,
why.
no.
Yeah, so all of that to say, you're just going to hit your wall faster. Um,
Well, I think the thing that is very true is they clearly don't want keys to go very high, right? Like
yeah,
they want this to be an infinitely scaling system, but they don't want infinite to be that high. Right now, there's a whole lot of timed 20s out there amongst the top level people. I think just adjustments to the dungeons, and also the ring has buffed item level a little bit and increased survivability a little bit. So there's 20s being timed now. I would guess next season we get 22, 23, maybe to 25, but I don't think they want it to be that much higher than that. They did this whole key scaling thing. And so you think about it, a 20 is the equivalent of an old 30, and they
Yeah.
didn't like when keys scaled much past 30. Like
Hmm.
32, 33 was like the highest keys kind of went. And so I think we're probably going to see something where that exponential scaling will kind of end up cutting you off at similar levels, and it'll just be the later in expansion you just become more powerful that'll be lifting people into higher keys than the season before it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this is going to feel a lot more natural. It isn't going to feel like season 1 where you're like, okay, chugging along, hit what was it? 7 when they add the death affix,
Yep.
and then ultimately you're failing keys, and then you go from 7 to 10 where you get both Tyran and Fort, and you're like, now you're failing even more keys, and then you go into 12 and you can't even complete the 12. Like, it's going to feel a lot more steady,
Yeah.
and not just like every X levels you're just brick walled,
Hmm.
which ultimately is a good thing. Like, if you can time an 11 with minutes left, you should be able to time a 12. And that
Yeah.
wasn't the case in season 1. It
Yeah.
should be the case in season 2.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
especially people were like two chest and three chesting 12s and then hitting that brick wall, and it just didn't feel fair. It's like the system is telling you you're ready for a 12 if you're two chesting an 11, and then you just didn't feel like you were. So
mhm,
yeah, I'm for this. I did not like that original implementation, and I'm glad they've walked it back. So
yeah. Yeah,
happy
and
about it.
I definitely think that since we are denoting 12s as a higher end key now, we do need to have something at the 12 level that makes those keys significantly different or something, because it doesn't really make much sense to say, okay, at a 12, doing keys higher than this really isn't netting you much more when we are still just continuing to do the same things that we were below that for people who were chasing rewards from the system.
Yeah, I
So,
agree, and I thought long and hard if like is just taking away the kiss part of the kiss curse like is that enough to differentiate it, or does it need to be something else still? And kind of where I settled in my head is that it still needs to be something else as well. It can't
yeah.
just be like you're losing a buff. It has to be you're losing a buff, but also something else is happening. Um,
Mhm.
I guess the worst thing I have to say about this one is it's not very interesting. It's just
Yep.
like ooh, things are going to scale more aggressively. You will probably not notice until one day you will. And
And
like
then you'll die to something.
that's kind of boring.
Yeah.
But whatever. It's fine.
So the other affixes, we got changes to the Zalateth's bargain affixes, and I
Yep.
think on first read of these, Scott and I weren't too thoroughly impressed, to
So
say the least.
so the big thing that they've done is that they've standardized the consequence for failing the Zalatest
Yep.
bargain. So it used to be that every of the four different affixes would have a different consequence for failing. Um, if it was, and it usually had something to do with the kiss benefit that you're getting, right? So like if it's the one that gives you haste and you fail to do it, well, you've just super hasted the boss. If it's the
Yep.
one, I think there was the one that heals the boss because if you don't heal the stuff off you in time, it heals the boss. They got rid of all that and it's all standardized now. So all it is failing these affixes will increase damage done by enemies by up to 50% and reduce damage taken by up to 100% for 20 seconds. Essentially meaning, every single one of these affixes has multiple points of failure, right? Like it's not a binary. It's not a you succeed or you fail. It's there are some number of orbs. There are 5 debuffs. There are how many casts the enemy gets off, that kind of thing. So they all have varying degrees of failure. So like a if you completely ignore the affix and do nothing, the boss will do 50% more damage and be immune for 20 seconds. But if you do 1/5 of it, 4/5 of it, it'll be different. I
Yep.
I actually really like this because it's simpler, it's neater, um, and it doesn't have stupid things that happens. Like one of the dumbest things in the world is in like Dawnbreaker. if you didn't get the affix off in time and then you moved to the flying phase, the affix would just sit there and heal the boss, and there's just nothing you can do about it, which is really stupid. So that'll get rid of stuff like that from happening. So I think that's cleaner and neater and easier to understand as a player than trying to remember, okay, it's this affix this week. I have to do this. If I fail to do this, what is the boss going to do now? It's just easier.
Yeah. So the other part of this that I want to say though is the it feels weird that you're still going to have to memorize the benefits, but not like the downside. So like there is still going to be some matching up of the affixes to the benefits, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you will, but like, I mean, the game is teaching you do the right thing. It's not like you necessarily have to know you're getting cooldown reduction
That's fair.
beforehand. It's not like you're gonna say, "Ooh, which one does this benefit me?" Okay, then I'll definitely make sure I do the affix. Like the game wants you to do the affix no matter what. It's just how it'll feel different than when you succeed. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't oh, okay, there. I finally found it. Sorry, I was like trying to scour Wowhead on where these damn changes were so that I could remember exactly what they were. Um, so we're getting a new Zaliteth's bargain,
correct.
which is gonna be essentially these like orbs that rotate around you, is my understanding.
I have I have a very difficult time understanding what this means. And so okay, so it's replacing Oblivion, which is the one that would summon random orbs that would spawn and then move towards an enemy or a boss, and you had to intercept them before they hit the enemy or the boss. um it's it's taking that one away because that one had a lot of not fun interactions on certain boss fights, like certain very positional required boss fights, um, that you just couldn't get the orbs without dying.
Mm,
So I'm glad they're doing that. But yeah, until I see this pulsar thing, I'm not sure what it's going to look like. So it says, while in combat, Zalateth summons pulsars that orbit players and must be intercepted within a time limit. So it's a thing circling you. It
yep.
has to be intercepted. So my guess here essentially is, because it's circling me, it's following me. So the way it has to be intercepted is by another player.
Mhm.
So my guess here is that the 5 players are going to have to intercept each other's pulsar within a certain amount of time. Um,
Yeah. Which reading it, because there was a little bit more information released around it, is it says after 15 seconds, the void pulsar releases its energy, granting creatures Zalateth's gift, increasing their damage by 10%, reducing damage taken by 20% for 20 seconds. This affects stacks. So again, if you half-ass fail the mechanic, then they get some of these stacks. If you
mhm.
full on fail it, 100% immune and everything else.
Yeah.
Um, but it says players that come into contact with void pulsars empower players, granting them 4% mastery, 2% leech for 30 seconds. This affects stacks. So, is this a case where if one person sucks these up, the entire group's going to get it like it was with Oblivion?
I
Or is
would
this
think so.
one person is going to have to figure it out?
No, I would think it affects the whole group. That's everything else in these affixes affect the whole group
Hmm.
when one person does something. So I would assume it's that.
Okay. Well, then I think that honestly, all this is removing the bugginess that was in Oblivion and essentially tying it to the players so that it no longer can have the like weird spawning in the water in Siege of Borellis
Yeah.
or moving through walls if you pull mobs on one side of the wall and then they just kind of stay there for a second and then they phase through the wall and they're almost at the mobs. Like
Yeah.
I think that that's all that this is really doing. I don't think that this is meant to be anything more than just like trying to fix the bugginess that was Oblivion. I
Yeah.
don't
And I
think it's
think
an actual new
I,
affix.
yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just instead of moving towards the boss, they're just going to circle players, and so
Mhm.
you're still going to have to move to intercept things. It's just you have to. It allows for a better coordination as a group. I also still like. I think it could be sufficiently challenging if you have, still if you still have a boss that has a lot of strict movement requirements and you have to deal with this in the middle of it. It still could be challenging, but not like unfairly challenging. That was like you're needing to bait a cone from the boss, but there are orbs spawning the other direction, moving towards the boss that you don't want to bait that direction. Welp, I guess I can do one thing. It's like, the giant boss in Siege of Borealis. They have to hide behind the pillars as the water comes.
Yep.
The affix could spawn orbs during that, and they would just move towards the boss. It's like, I can't. What do you want me to do? I have to stand in the safe zone.
Yeah.
And so it'll fix all that. So I think it's a pretty elegant solution. Is it doing the same thing as the Mastery and Leech bonus, the same one that was on Oblivion? I don't even remember.
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, Oblivion was the mastery one. So yeah, I think that this is literally the same thing. I think it is literally the same thing, but like I said, just removing the ability for that jankiness to happen.
Yeah.
Now that being said, affixes we have hated the most in the past have been ones that force you to move or do something in moving. So
This is
I'm a
just
little bit
thundering.
concerned about that.
It's just stealth thundering, and we just haven't even noticed.
So, but that's the new affix and the removed affix. I am very surprised, to be completely honest with you, Scott, that we didn't see a removal of the dispel affix. Now, that being said, it is annoying that there are 5 things to dispel. It's nice you can heal it off. It's nice that the healing you do isn't negated. But all of that being said, when you have this dispel affix currently, you are incentivized to take classes that can deal with their own affix in some way. And so I think that is a little bit of a miss. And I think that it causes a lot of problems when it comes to bosses that have dispel mechanics, because now you're having to decide between 20% reduced damage on a boss or a party member's dead.
Yeah.
So that is, I still hate this. I still hate the dispel affix.
So I've been on my healer arc recently. I don't like this affix at all. I really don't. I mean, you are absolutely correct in that you prioritize people that can handle their own, because certainly those weeks I've been looking at joining groups that have people that can handle their own. The problem is nobody fucking does it in Pugs, man. Nobody handles their own. I can't tell you how many times I've been grouping with like 2 paladins and a druid, and it's just like, y'all don't just dispel yourself. What are you doing? It's so frustrating. It's so I end up just having to pump heals into people, and it just doesn't ever feel good. It feels like in Pugs it's just the healer affix again, which is exactly what I don't think they wanted. It sucks. It really does suck. I think the change to make it, because I think this is the one that healed the enemy, if you failed to do it. And so getting rid of that and making it so they're invulnerable to damage means it's going to affect DPS players' damage meters. And so maybe they'll finally fucking do something about the affix.
Or they'll just complain at the healer that now they're dealing less damage.
Yeah. Come on, healer. Heal off the app. Dude, it sucks. It sucks.
Other than that, though, I think that the majority of these affixes are largely untouched. But I am looking forward to seeing how this all interacts. I'm with you that I like that there's just one collective downside, and you don't have to be wondering what's going to happen when you don't do the affix correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still happy with the upsides from these affixes. I think a lot of them are very, very strong, especially the one that gives you verse. I think that that's by far the strongest of the affix benefits.
Yeah.
And then I think that that's followed very closely by the one that gives you ability haste. I think the ability haste one is insane as well. I mean, just look back to Shadowlands when all you did was kill the Ur relic over and over and over and over and over again. Like, ability haste is insane. So
yeah, they also did change the void bound affix slightly as well. The one that's the one that summons the ad that channels a spell.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So how it works right now is the second the ad starts channeling the spell, all the enemies around the ad get damage reduction on them, which is annoying and stupid. And then like the longer the channel goes off, the stronger the DR gets, and it's really bad. So they changed it now to where it's not a channeled spell that like Tranquility where it hits at different breakpoints. It's just a 15-second cast, and you have the 15 seconds it's casting to kill the thing. If you succeed, you win. If you fail, the amount of buff you will get and the amount of buff the enemies will get is based on the percentage of shield left. So if you had only 20% or less of the shield, then the bad guys would get 1 stack and you would get 4 stacks. That's how it works now. Much better change. I hated that thing. The fact that it could pop up in the middle of a burn phase on a boss fight and just
Mhm.
completely fuck you was awful. And this is a very good change.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm trying to think. I don't think that there was anything else around affixes that we really wanted to drill into too much.
No, I think the only thing I wanted to say was just that they didn't make any changes to the Challenger's Peril one, which I
Yeah,
still can't believe. Um,
yeah.
I do think one Mythic Plus change that like we got to talk about. This is the biggest news ever. Is that the KSM mount is not just a recolor of last season's KSM mount. It's a whole new mount. Is there any precedent for this? Has this ever happened?
No, it actually hasn't, which is hilarious. But I do think, uh, is it a car? Do we get to drive around in a fancy new sports car?
I think it's a rocket car. I don't actually know what it is. It's a goblin thing. It's goblin themed for sure.
Awesome. But no, there isn't any precedent for it. And I like seeing this because they bring out a new mount system and then they bring out something that can probably interface with that mount system as a reward, which they should have done for dragon riding and fucking Dragonflight when
Yep.
dragon riding came out.
Yep.
They didn't do it. They only did it for PvPers and Mythic Raiders. They didn't do it for people who did Mythic Plus because why would they do that? That wouldn't make any sense, Scott. That just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
So no, it's nice to see. The other thing that I want to say though is it makes me wonder what season 3 will be. Like, will season 3 be its own new mount, or will it go back to the season 1 mount of being a flying mount that can do dragon riding but just a different color? You know,
I don't know. I guess that depends on what the theme is
Yeah.
of season 3. I just want to say we're going to get into some more details outside the Mythic Plus system. I think the aesthetic and idea behind this season and raid and all the shit is awesome. I
Yep.
think it's really awesome, and I'm really excited about it. Like it really feels like Blizzard was having a lot of fun with the ideas that they were coming up with here. I mean, look, let me just list you the name of some of the bosses in this raid. I know we said we weren't going to do this, but I have to do this. There's Styx Bunk Junker. There's Sprocket Monger Lockenstock. There's Muggsy Heads of Security, which is a 2-headed ogre. There's Vexy and the Gear Grinders. Rick Reverb. The one-armed bandit. This is awesome. This is awesome.
It's going to be a fun time. And if their recent raid design is anything to be kind of quoted here, I think that the bosses are going to be very fun.
Yes.
I do think that they have a little bit of a difficulty scaling issue, but I think as far as like designing fun encounters, they've been doing a very good job at that.
For sure. I think that leads us into Dinars.
So, okay, Scott, before we jump into this, and everybody hears us talking about Dinars, when I first read this, I was like, oh shit, they're finally fucking doing it. They're not really doing it.
No, they tricked you.
So what this does is, and this pisses me off more than anything because I am not somebody who grinds out rep. Even given the new like renown system, I've never grinded out a rep to max renown. So this pisses me off because this is directly tied to reps that are going to be in season 2, or a rep.
Sort of. So, okay, let's be clear here. It is Monday, the 6th of January. We don't, the thing isn't on PTR yet. So what we could say here could be proven wrong in 24 hours. And by the time people are listening to this, we could have been proven wrong. However, this is a specific renown track that is separate from the renown tracks we're getting for the new factions in the patch. It is specific to the raid. And it has within it benefits for the raid, including the stacking buff that we got in season 1 for the raid, this is just a new method of acquiring that stacking buff. To the point where it seems, again, this is speculation, it seems like you will get rep for this faction from killing bosses in the raid, and that will be the primary method of gaining renown with this faction. Um, and things will be time gated based off that. So like let's just play pretend and say that you're going to get one renowned level. If you clear the raid, you're going to get one renown level a week, right? And that's how they're going to dole out things like the stacking buff to the raid. That's how they're going to do all these other cool things they have, where you can run faster in the raid, where you can drink quicker. Like it's actually pretty exciting, because there's all these fun side benefits that some are for fun and some are just quality of life things.
Yep.
But the things you're talking about is at level 17 and 19 of the renown track. There are things that look certainly like dinar like. They are things that say like you get like a coupon that allows you to get one piece of loot of your choice. The thing about this is based on so that you don't get this your first dinar until after you've gotten the raid buff stacked up to its maximum amount. And
Yep.
so what people are doing is they're basically looking at how many weeks it took in the current season to get the raid buff stacked up to its maximum amount, adding a couple more weeks on top of that, and saying about how far into the season is it going to be before we get our first of the 2 dinars we get. And essentially it's right now. maybe 2 weeks ago roughly. But pretty much halfway through the season is when you're going to get that stuff.
So I'm happy to hear that this is likely going to be completely housed in the raid. The way that I took this when I was reading it initially is that this was just going to be another rep farm kind of outlet. But if this is completely in the raid, and I know you're not 100% certain, but if this is completely housed in the raid, I like that, because that means doing raid things gets you raid deterministic loot. And I
Yeah.
think that in and of itself is good. Now, we have to talk about it's almost like the time economy of money, or whatever the fuck it's called, time value of money,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like loot now is worth more than loot in the future,
Yes.
just like money now is worth more than money in the future.
Mm-hmm.
If you're having to wait forever to get this, the likelihood that you're even doing the raid anymore, or even playing the game, is lower, and the likelihood that you need it is lower. The likelihood you haven't gotten it is lower.
Yeah.
Now, this is a renown track, though. So does this carry over to your alts? Like, reps carry over to your alts in your warband. So can you just get a dinar right out the gate on your alt?
I would assume yes, because I mean, I think walking back the fact that renowned is warband linked would be a huge change for them. So
Yep.
I would think that means if you're 3 months from the end of the season, you've completely unlocked the renown track and you decide to switch an alt, you get to pick 2 pieces of gear from the raid right away, which is good, and that should be the way it works. I think the thing here is just, is the timing good? Is it good enough? And I mean, like, I think the argument here from Blizzard would be like, this is always was supposed to be bad luck protection. It's so you don't go through the entire season trying to get the one item you want from the raid and just never get it. And so we feel that this point in the season, which is roughly halfway through the season, is enough time passed that we are okay with you getting that item. I could see that. I feel like maybe just a little bit quicker
Yeah.
would be beneficial. But let's let them test this. Let's see what it's like. Let's see, first of all, when it actually happens within the season, and see where everyone's at within that season. And then maybe we can take a step back and say, okay, next season 3, should this be faster? Should it be slower? I doubt I'm going to say that, but we can see. The thing I'm excited about overall is just that A, they're willing to do it, and B, this renown track idea could be this really cool kind of flavor thing to bring to the raid. Because I don't know if you've looked at the whole track. There's a lot of like just fun stuff in there, not related to the buff, not related to Dinar. It's just like fun quality of life stuff that's going to be nice when on week 5 you unlock whatever. I think it's pretty cool and it's a fun idea.
I wonder how everything's going to shake out here, because the way that I'm envisioning this and the way that I almost kind of hope it gets implemented is that you get rep for killing the bosses once a week.
Yeah,
And it doesn't, that's independent of the level at which you kill them at.
I would hope
So
so.
that
Yeah,
people can still get like the same amount of progress towards this track as
yeah,
somebody doing mythic, and it doesn't incentivize you to kill the boss on normal and then kill the boss on heroic and then kill the boss on mythic and just get more XP
yeah.
or rep. So that's the way I'm
My
envisioning it, at
my
least.
assumption is, and again, complete conjecture, but it's going to work the exact same way that like the items you collect to get the buff increase in the raid right now, right? That uh maybe it won't be an item anymore. Maybe it's just kill boss, get rep, and they've simplified the process there, which I think is in line with their idea of like, why are we having all these like you have to collect things to turn in things? Just have like
Yeah.
a bar go up. Like we can do that. Why don't we just do it? And so I think it'll probably do that, and then it'll probably have a catch up mechanic to it, just like the Silken whatever has right now, where if you're several weeks behind, instead of just dropping one thing, the bosses will drop 2 things or 3 things or 4 things. I think the same will be with the renowned. If you're several tracks behind, you'll get more per boss kill. That's my guess, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
So the other thing that I wanted to say about this, and then we can move on, because again, this is all speculation, but it almost feels like to me this isn't a solution for deterministic, like getting deterministic loot for a main. It almost feels like that this is potentially somewhat of a band-aid for their alt unfriendliness, this expansion.
It might be. I mean, I think what it is really like is if you're someone that's been killing heroic Silken Court every week and have never gotten your Spy Masters, like at least at one point you will get your Spy Masters.
Sure.
Um, and I don't know actually like this thing is going to have its own upgrade track similar to you remember in season 4 of Dragonflight that the Dinar items you got there had their own separate
Yep.
upgrade track. I would assume this is going to have that same thing. Actually, I think I know it is because there's 14 levels of upgrades there. Um, so that means it's also you're essentially getting a myth track level
Yeah.
item, which is
Which is
pretty
good.
huge. Yeah. And
So
so this brings up the last thing I want to talk about here, which is I love this. It's great. It adding deterministic loot to like some of your most important pieces that after a certain amount of time you can get it is awesome. They forgot about something though. They forgot about Mythic Plus. And those of us whose best trinkets come from a dungeon, and the only way to get a myth track version of that trinket is to get lucky in the vault. And that's it. That's the only way.
I'm still a proponent that we need to have Myth Track in a dungeon loot at some point in the Mythic Plus track.
Yeah, well, actually, I agree with you. This is actually like, it's a weird thing that's happening because, especially with the fact that crafting is so much cheaper now, essentially what your gear shakes out as is you get your 4 tier pieces. And then if you haven't gotten myth track on those are sitting at 626 right now. Then you get crafted and everything else.
Mhm.
So that's all at 636. And then, of course, your trinkets, which are usually not crafted. And so it's just a little frustrating that to literally like my bet, like Sackbrood and there's a trinket from Grimbatol, a healer trinket from Grimbatol that's just like really fucking awesome. Those are my 2 best trinkets. And like I have to roll the vault to get those. It's the only way. It's the only way. And because like that didn't used to be as big of a deal when the difference between a max level heroic trinket and a max level myth trinket was smaller than it is today. But today it's 13 item levels. It's
Yep.
13. That's a huge amount. And there's nothing I can do except hope that I get lucky on one of 3 shots each week in a vault. Like I can't even like target it. It's like the it is difficult to get loot from bosses in raid. You got one shot at it per week. It's got but at least like the pool of items in there is smaller. In the vault, it's the entirety of the loot in all dungeons that you
Yeah.
have to roll for to get one trinket. You get 3 rolls a week, and against the whole loot pool, I do think this is a problem. And I really think the choice to up myth track stuff to 6 out of 6 really exacerbated this problem. And
Yeah.
I would like them to either walk that back, or if they're going to introduce these late season catch up things like the dinar system, let us use them for Mythic Plus loot as well. Let us use it for dungeon loot, please.
So what happens if, and I don't know if this needs to be its own separate track. So we have the delve track, right? Like that I think is ultimately what this is going to be kind of trying to match, is that like delve track progress thing that we currently have.
Sure. Yeah.
Um and so at whatever regular intervals you're getting things for the raid, what if we had one for Mythic Plus, or we just had one for high end PvE in general, Raid and Mythic Plus together, and then you could use dinars on both or something like that. Like, I think that that might be potentially a better solution for this that also covers Mythic Plus. But then
Yeah.
you get into the situation of like, well, it's weird to give Mythic Plus benefits to people who are only doing Raid, and it's weird to give Raid benefits to people only doing Mythic Plus. But if you have a second track, then it's more shit that you have to track. So I don't
Yeah.
really know the correct way to solve this, but I almost feel like if we are going down this route, and even if it isn't this season, we need to have something somewhat similar in season 3 for Mythic Plus.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we're continuing to see here is just raid and dungeon have always had completely different gearing systems in them. And it was never really a problem in the game when the structure of the game was you do dungeons until you get enough gear, and then you do raids, and raids are your best in slot gear, and that's the end game. Now we have 2 tracks of end game. We have Mythic Plus and we have Raid. And in one track, bosses reset every week, and you only get one shot at that boss per week. And the other track, you can do the dungeon infinity amount of times. And the idea that you can do the dungeon infinity amount of times is baked into the content. That is part of the system. So they
Yep.
can't change that ever. So their solution here has always been like, well, if you can get a million shots at getting a piece of gear in 1 week versus one shot, then that gear has to be worse. That is why Myth Track gear does not drop from Mythic Plus, right? That
Yep.
and why I don't think it ever will, because then everyone would just run Mythic Plus and have no incentive to raid, and all the people that don't like Mythic Plus and like to raid would be like, hey, what the fuck? And so yeah, the essential problem here is dungeons in the original design and conception of the game were never meant to be a place that you could get top high end gear. But in the world that we live in now, where you and me and the majority of the people that are playing it, I say majority, I don't know that for sure, but a lot of people who interface with this game are only interested in the dungeon content of this game, and
Yep.
they would like to get maximum item level, just like people that are only interested in the raid have the ability to get maximum item level. And I know people that like to raid don't like to Mythic Plus. Like I know that there's those people as well. And so it feels like we're in this unsustainable thing where someone is always just going to be unhappy, and it's the Mythic Plus people that so often feel like they're getting shafted. And when they originally came out with this upgrade system, it really felt like they were throwing a bone to the Mythic Plus players, because it felt like our item level difference between someone only running Mythic Plus and someone running Myth Raid was smaller than ever. But then they've continually, like, they added a myth track, and then they added the number of things to it, and so
Yep.
that gap that had shrunken has now grown again. And yeah, we're in this really weird situation where like I get it, I get why this difference exists, but it just kind of does suck. It sucks that I'm probably just never going to get the best version of my trinket, and like I'm sitting at 636 or higher everything but the stupid trinket because I'm just waiting to see if I get lucky in a vault.
Yeah, I definitely think that I don't know. I feel like if you're in a group of people who are playing the game and doing the raid together, and it's the same static group of people over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, that it makes it a lot less punishing when you can divvy up loot on your own. And I think that in the situation that we have with Mythic Plus, where everything's random at all times, always, and I mean, some people are genuinely running with the same group over and over again, and can divvy up loot. I think that you run into this issue a lot more in Mythic Plus, though, because it's a lot
Yeah.
more what I would say pug friendly. It's a lot more, get 5 people together and go, which is half the amount of people that you need to even go into a raid. Uh, so yeah,
Yeah.
I don't really know how you solve this. Ultimately, I think this is going to come down to what you and I have said needs to happen for years at this point. But for as long as this podcast has been running, there needs to be some sort of overhaul or look into the Mythic Plus system as a whole.
Yeah.
And that might be the point at which they can address some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing where one of the reasons where we heard about that, I'm blanking on the name of it, but that game that was created that was just like we just made Mythic Plus a game on its own,
Hmm.
and we played the alpha of that, and I don't know if we're allowed to talk about it, so I won't. But like that type of thing is really exciting to me because that can design a gearing system that doesn't have to mesh into all this other mess, right? That
Yep.
there's no raid in that game that we have to worry about offending those people with how we're getting our loot in our dungeons. And it just is a type of thing that makes me feel like, man, maybe they should just spin these two things completely off from each other and just make the gearing for each of them entirely independent of each other. And I don't, in my heart, that doesn't feel like the right move because I love this game for the many facets of it and them all existing in the same world. But maybe it is the right move. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about this week, I think I was listening to a podcast where they talked about like that Fortnite like recently announced a whole new version of their game that's
Hmm.
I think more trying to specifically compete with like the Counter-Strike, short team-based objective maps. And I was thinking about that and I was thinking how Fortnite has basically become this hub that has like a bunch of different game types in it. And I was thinking, well, hasn't World of Warcraft essentially become that same thing? Like you buy a sub and now it's a spoke with a bunch of different hubs off it. You have classic, you have hardcore, you have like Plunderstorm, and like maybe it makes sense somewhere down the road to just make a spoke of this wheel that's just Mythic Plus, that
Hmm.
World of Warcraft Mythic Plus, and that would feel weird to me because again, I like that everything in this world is interconnected, but like maybe it would be ultimately more healthy for the system.
Yeah, yeah, and it would give them the ability to have dev time specific for Mythic Plus and everything like that. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't hate the idea. Again, it just comes back to the argument that we always have of like, is fragmenting the player base in another splinter a good idea or not? You know.
Mm-hmm.
Um. All right, Scott. Is there anything else PVE wise that you want to talk about? I do know that there's something that I don't have on this list that you might want to at least say a couple words about because you were pretty excited about it. Though I think it pissed PvPers off.
Oh,
The
what was
Druid
that?
class tree.
Oh, are PvPers mad about the Druid class tree?
Well, yeah, because they have to decide between CC options where they used to have a bunch of
Oh,
different CC
well,
options.
I mean, can we? Are they here? Are they listening? Nobody cares about PvP. Nobody cares. No, yeah, they did another revamp of the Druid class tree, which makes this the 70th since they did the talent trees. I mean, on first pass, it looks pretty good. It solves a lot of the problems. I think it moves nodes around. Like there were dead nodes you had to take in the tree. Like you had to take iron bark or not iron bark. You had to take iron fur, um, which was in the class tree for some reason. It didn't make any sense at all. Um, and so they've gotten rid of a lot of that. There's some interesting changes on the Resto Druid side where they're really, I think the developer specifically said they want to simplify Resto Druid's damage rotation a little bit. And part of that is they're going to add a choice node that buffs either your physical damage or your spell damage by 25%. Essentially, what they're doing is they're going to make you, as a Resto Druid, choose: do you want to cat weave or do you want to cast spells?
Hmm.
And I think that's cool. And I like that. I think, honestly, at the end of the day, it's going to be someone's going to tell me which does more damage, and I'm going to do that one. But I just like the idea that they're trying to solve the problems. Again, I haven't played with the tree yet very much. I mean, I looked at it on Wowhead and it looked good, but I'm sure some problems will pop up as you go through and play it. But overall, I think it looks pretty good.
I'm just happy to hear that druids actually got love, because it feels like the class tree got changed, and then it got changed again, and then it got changed again, and then it got changed again, and it's just like it never was really for the better. It was always just kind of like moving things around, but it was still bad. Like
Yeah.
the best changes that they did, I think, since the druid class tree coming out, or druid trees coming out in general, and up until this new revamp of the glass tree, was allowing boomkins to actually take their interrupt, because
Mm-hmm.
they weren't when the glass tree first came out, because it was not really accessible at all.
Yeah.
um so that was a good change, but
Well,
there hasn't really been a good one
one
since.
other change they did for Resto is that your improved Nature's Cure that removes curse and poison is now baseline. You don't have to take the talent for that. You just get it.
Oh.
Um, and also, they made the Moonkin. If you're a Moonkin, the Skull Bash talent switches to an improvement on your interrupt. So you can't take Skull Bash and have your Solar Flare, I think it's called.
Hmm.
It's just something that I think shortens the cooldown of Solar Flare. So again, pretty cool stuff. I think they're like leaning into the idea that something we noticed with the Paladin tree was that like the class tree isn't really the class tree. Sometimes
Yeah.
it changes depending on what your spec is, and they're really leaning into that to solve a lot of problems here. But I think if it solves the problems, I'm fine with it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I like a lot of the changes. I'm for them. Um, and I think I'm excited to play Druid next patch. I think it's gonna be fun. They made a lot of announcements on some resto changes they're making. They're changing how their mastery works. I think it's gonna make them a little bit better in Mythic Plus. So pretty excited.
So on that though, continuing your excitement for Druid, do you want to talk about the tier sets that we have been told about in season 3 or season 2?
I have had an emotional roller coaster with these things. Yeah, so the big change they announced with the tier sets is that they were doing role based tier sets. And essentially, what that means is the 2-piece for each role, that is tank, healer, melee, and ranged, will all share a 2-piece. And the 2-piece is basically like do X and it will get you a buff, yada, 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 yada. The healer one is called insurance. It basically says all your healing spells will put a hot on a random party member. When they drop below 40% health, that hot will trigger and do a big heal on them. And my initial reaction to this was, you idiots. um so what it did is it came off as lazy. It came off in my mind as, we can't think of 39 whatever unique tier sets, so we're just going to come up with 4, and that'll make our lives a little bit easier. I think they also made a really bad mistake when they announced this, because they gave us 2 examples when they announced this, which was Protection Paladin and Holy Priest. And the Holy Priest one is dog shit. It's awful. And I think the tank one in general is kind of eh. And so they gave us like really shitty examples of what this could be. And so I was really, really down on it. I thought it was lazy. And then they actually made all of them come out, and I'm a lot cooler on it, or I'm a lot less mad about it now. I think it's a cool idea. I think aesthetically it's really cool because it ties into the whole goblin thing. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, the truth about tier sets every patch is that some are really good some are really bad, and most of them are just kind of whatever. And I think that will be the case whether they share two pieces or not. I think the problem with sharing the two piece is you get to see very clearly a thing um, like Frosty K, which is looks just awful and boring and lame, and then you see some other classes with the same melee one, and it looks really cool and fun. Um, and it's just a lot easier to see like this is what we could have had, but we didn't. Um, so I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's a little bit surprising to me that I thought, they always tell the thing is like tier sets are going to be the least impactful on your gameplay in the first season because you have these new talents. They said this expansion you have all these new hero talents and we want you focusing on learning your hero talents, so your tier sets are going to be really boring, but going into future expansions they're going to be a lot less boring, a lot less passive. They're going to change your gameplay, and there's really not too many of these that are going to have any impact on your gameplay. So from a healer perspective, I don't think they're going to at all.
I,
And from a tank perspective, definitely not.
the way that I see this though is like for the tank. So the reason the tank one is so bad for anybody who hasn't read it is essentially like it gives you damage increase. So like that part's good. Randomly proc damage increase. But the other part of that is it also gives you randomly proc defensives, which like that's literally useless. Like it can be good, but in most cases will do nothing for you.
The odds that this proc will go off at a point where you were going to need to press a button and therefore you can be like, I don't have to press my button anymore, are just so slim that it's almost never going to be useful.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you could maybe argue, like in a Mythic Plus situation, these procs will kind of sort of help smooth damage a little bit. But like so much of survivability as a tank in this game is binary. It's did I die or did I not die? And I just like think this is going to so rarely proc in a situation where you maybe would have died and now you won't, to the point where like you're never gonna be able to plan around it, right? Like so
Yep.
much of tanking is planning your rotation, your cooldown rotation, and you're just never going to be able to do that. And things are going to be happening so fast paced that like, oh, my two piece procced, now I don't have to press this cooldown. Like it's just not going to actually happen that way
Well,
in
and it can mess you
99.
up. Like
Yeah.
not using a cooldown can mess everything up.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah, I think that this has a potential to be fun for DPS. I think that this has a potential for you to have interactions in which, like, spending these procs that you get, um, can change things. Like, it might make you prioritize something else, or see that you need to use this thing, and then you get a big burst of damage or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that that's going to be the most interesting interaction though. Like it isn't going to be something where it's going to be this massive gameplay change.
Yeah.
Um,
So from a Resto Druid perspective, which is the one I've spent the most time studying, it will not change my gameplay at all.
yeah.
It's actually gonna be the probably more beneficial for Resto Druid. So I'll say this: it's a hot, right? The effect for healers is a hot. So any healer that really does well with hots is going to benefit from this tier set more than a healer that doesn't, right? So Resto Druid, Mistweaver, all really, really effective hot healers. Resto Shaman, not so much, right? Like they don't. There's a reason why Resto Shaman doesn't really take a lot of haste, um, and so like as a Resto Druid, if this thing counts for my mastery as well, it's gonna be like super useful. It's gonna be a
Yeah.
lot of fun. Um, but it still will be entirely passive. Like I'm not going to change how I heal because of this. Like I think so. The four piece effect is every time insurance falls off or procs, it will put a random hot on that person that they didn't have. So if it'll either rejuve, regrowth, or wild growth. It will just put one of those on. We haven't got to test it yet, so we don't know what the priority system would be. Obviously, rejuve would be the ideal one in there, that it would do rejuve first and then the other two, but we just don't know yet. And that's really cool because it also happens like they just have been knocked below 40%. So like getting heals on those people right now is good.
Yep.
Um, but then you have things like Holy Priest, which is like, I can't remember exactly what it is, but essentially it benefits you keeping the buff up longer. So like if the person with the number of people that have insurance on them means you're doing more healing, but then like a big damage spike happens and everyone drops below 40, so all their insurance procs are gone, and now you do less healing at the exact time when you need to do the most healing. It just like it's just weird. And so I think these are going to be like really cool on some and then really super lame on others.
Yeah, I think the two biggest key takeaways from this are they are all entirely passive. There are you get X, spend X doing something else. Like all of
Yeah.
this, like you aren't going out of your way really to generate anything by doing any different gameplay.
Yeah.
And then spending them is what has the potential to change your gameplay in some way. And even that, like for the most part, from what I'm reading, nah, it's not gonna do that.
Well, I
Like,
mean, it's really interesting because like the melee one is, I forget what it's called, but you basically stack up a buff, right? Like every
yep,
time you use ability, you're stacking up a buff, and then some spenders have a risk of accidentally like dropping the buff.
hmm
Um, but then in some instances, it's the spenders that you would use like during your normal rotation anyway, and in some instances it's not it's like a builder, like it's inconsistent. Like the smoothest gameplay is you're stacking up this buff, you get the buff as high as possible, and then you start using your big damage hitting spenders with the risk that every time you do this you might like crap out and lose your buff, which is fun. But then some, it's like it's not the ability that causes the buff to accidentally drop is not the one. It's not your hardest hitting ability. It's that,
yeah.
so like it's just like, okay, well I'm just gonna avoid pressing that, which might feel better. It's just weird. It's like inconsistent across classes.
I also don't like the like potential nature of doing something four times in a row and doing a billion damage and doing the same thing four times in a row and doing significantly less damage.
Yeah, it's gonna make
Um,
damage like really spiky, I guess. I
yeah,
mean, I'm guessing like they're gonna program the amount of procs to like average out over time, so it's not gonna be too
but it could
crazy.
still fuck
But
you in a boss burn.
yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
So I think that's an issue. Anyways, all of these tier sets, passive, what I'm going to call somewhat boring, because again, it's generalized tier sets. So, it's not a super specific thing, but I will say, and this is the thing that I want to like send everybody off with on this. This is a new, unique take on tier sets. They're
Yeah,
trying something new. Like, don't go
yeah,
into this super negative yet because it's showing that they want to iterate, they want to innovate, they want to do something new. I know they're boring. I know it comes off as somewhat lazy, but it's just something new.
right,
And if in a world in which we need to streamline things a little bit more to get on a better like balancing scale, then I think that's fine. But let's see how they work, judge it after they come out, and then we can have a better, more informed decision going forward from that.
for sure. Yeah. The last thing I'll say is I think my disappointment came from what I thought was going to happen versus what actually happened, because if you had asked me 2 months ago, I would have told you it's very clear in season one they didn't want to give a tier set that benefits one hero talent tree over another because they wanted you to be able to experiment with both of them and pick and choose. I thought that moving into the other seasons, to keep with the flavor of this is the hero talent expansion, that they would kind of try to tinker with the tier sets to a point where it maybe made the one that you never used a little bit more favorable. And that's obviously not what happened.
Mhm.
But I think that goes kind of part and parcel with what you were saying is a kind of change in how they approach the concept of tier sets in general. Because I think they used to use in expansions prior tier sets as a way of kind of plugging a hole in a spec. Like the spec has a problem. The spec is not performing, is not doing something the way it should, and we can fix that problem by adding a tier set that will solve it. Like I think the best example for me is Discipline Priest and the season 2 tier set. I think made Holy Radiance like instant cast. stacking up to 2, and it was just like awesome, and it fixed a big problem the spec had. I think they've gone away from doing that now, and I think if there's a big problem a spec is having, they're just gonna fix that in the talent tree. They're just
Yeah.
gonna like I think that's what we're seeing more now, that they're not gonna use tier sets in that matter. And so that's a change, and it's just something we got to get used to, is that it seems like maybe tier sets aren't going to be game fixing or game changing, or they're just going to be, here's this fun thing that has the flavor of whatever rage you're currently in. Now, do I love that idea? I don't know. In a system where there's no more borrowed power, tier sets are really the only thing left that can change our gameplay season to season. Um, so I would like them to serve that purpose, but we'll see. We'll see.
The number of tier sets that have become talents is very large.
Yeah,
And it worries me that if we're going down this more generalized path, we're going to see that less, which means we're going to see less innovation in classes potentially.
well, sure,
I
but
think
but you
that's my
could
big concern.
you could argue, instead of making it a tier set and then after that season turning that tier set into a talent, they're just making that in they're just adding that talent. Because I mean, like, you do agree that like there's a lot of class changes in
Yes.
11.1. Like there's a
Yep. Yep.
lot, a lot. So like they're possibly just cutting out tier sets as the middleman anymore. It's just like, we don't need to solve this via a tier set that we will down the road turn into a talent. Let's just make it a talent today and solve that problem.
Yeah. The only thing that I would say is tier sets almost forced you to play with these things. Whereas if they're just talents or just changes that they're making to classes, maybe they don't get as much like insight into it.
True. Yeah.
And people don't actually see if they're better or not. Again, I
Yeah.
don't think that any way is the right way or the wrong way. I think that what they're doing is the best thing. They're trying to innovate. They're trying to change. And I
Yeah.
think that that is what needs to happen. That's how we're going to keep making this game better.
I agree. I
So
think we can't sit here and demand that they try new things, and then when they try something new, be like, "What the fuck?"
yeah.
We got to at least give them the benefit of the doubt and
Yeah.
see how it works. And maybe we'll come back here at the end of season 2 and be like, "This experiment did not work. These were boring and uninteresting and weak, and we don't like them." So yeah.
So there's a couple more things that I want to cover really quick before we run out of time here, because I know we're coming up on time for the show. But the number one thing to talk about here is the buffs and nerfs, the aug nerf, and then the tank buffs. Starting with the tank buffs, because it's not very much. Tanks across the board got a threat increase of 22%.
Mhm.
And again, Blizzard's note on this was that they were trying to make it so that tanks weren't flipping back and forth aggro so much in raid. And again, this is going to help in Mythic Plus 100%. But I think it's hilarious because we definitely had that problem with our raid this season. And on
But only with
Ansrec,
one
that
boss.
was an issue.
But only with one boss. That was the weirdest thing. It was only
Yeah.
with Ansarek we had that problem. But yeah, I definitely, like, at the end of us all playing together, I was also like starting to have some threat issues on my bear, especially early pull with the way you guys were scaling damage. I mean, this has always been a problem that they've had, right? Like, of course, DPS scale better with gear. They do more damage with gear than a tank does. Of course, that's fine. But you always seem to get to a point where threat becomes an issue. And like, I really just want them to solve this problem permanently and not have to randomly do these big threat increases every so often.
Yeah.
It's just like, no one likes threat as a game mechanic. We've moved beyond that. The argument should essentially be, if you're standing in melee with the enemies hitting your buttons, you should not be losing threat. It should not happen. And the idea that it can is very, very silly. And I wish they could have a better, more permanent solution to this.
Well, we'll see what ends up happening. But, anyways, that's happened. This happens almost every expansion, almost every patch cycle. Tanks need a bump in their threat. And then they take it all away at the beginning of a new expansion. And then they do this whole song and dance of like increasing threat over the course of the expansion again. So,
I do sympathize with them, because I do know, like, the problem that has arisen before is if you make threat so insurmountable, then you have a problem of a tank can just kite permanently, right? And just hold
mhm,
threat and then can do massive. Like, I get it, but there's got to be a better solution than
yeah.
this.
The other part of this, though, the aug nerf, essentially, I think what this is targeting is removing augmentation as a required element to do the highest of high mythic plus keys almost specifically. So what
Yeah.
they did is they made it to where Ebb and Might will no longer benefit tanks and healers. Um, Now, that being said, the other buffs and everything that Aug does can still benefit them. So they will still bring a survivability aspect, and they will still bring like scales for your tank or anybody else that they need to put it on. But they aren't contributing as much damage. And in a world that we've been in for the last couple seasons, where Aug is just a damage loss currently, it is going to be more of a damage loss now to the point where they might not be meta and mythic plus. Again, we've had this speculation before that like losing closest clutch mates was going to push them out or anything like that. They're still there. So again, speculation, but I think that they're still trying to remove the need for augmentation at the
Yeah.
highest level of keys.
Yeah. And I mean, they need to. Like, I don't know if you've looked at the data recently, but they
Yeah,
are far and away the most represented class in
title
high
holder.
keys. Like,
Yeah.
but to an insane degree. Like it's every single one, and it's because they have to. And it's like they've got to figure out what to do about this.
Mhm.
And we've like I'm so hesitant to say this is going to do it because you're absolutely right. We've said this exact same thing. We've had this exact same sentiment in the past. We're like, oh, this is going to do it. This is going to do it, and we've been wrong. And so I I think perhaps it just allows them to turn the knobs a little bit, to have more control over the knobs a little bit when it's just simplifying this to only increase to DPS of damage dealers.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, you're absolutely also right that they still bring a lot of survivability. They bring a lot of utility. It's just whether we've gotten close enough to like a dev evoker bringing that same utility, like, I don't know. We'll see. I like it because it means they're at least acknowledging that there's a clear problem here, um, which they haven't seemed to do. Like, I didn't hate the idea of augmentation being in, but like everyone called this. Everyone, as soon as they announced this, said that like this was just going to become mandatory in keys, and they just have been right so far. So
Yep.
like they need to do something, and I feel bad for the AUG players. Like that's the thing, is like there are people that really enjoy playing this class, and I don't want to see them not get to play it anymore. I don't want to see it fall so far out of the meta that no one's going to ever invite an AUG to a key anymore, because I want people to play the class they like. But
But
man, this is ridiculous.
that's just the nature of a support class and being the only one. Like
Yeah.
that's what's going to happen.
This was a dumb idea. Like can we just it's been how long has it been since this, like 2 years now,
Yeah.
maybe?
About
It was a bad idea. I mean, it was cool. The game does not support it, and without adding other support classes and completely changing up how group composition works, either it's going to be mandatory or useless.
yes.
And I mean, bad idea.
Yeah, yeah. That's always been my argument ever since I've read this when it first came out is it's either going to be so good that it has to be brought or it's going to be worse than bringing another DPS, which means at that point it's useless. Which sucks because
Yeah.
you want people to be able to play a spec if you release a spec. But again, at this point, AUG has dominated high end Mythic Plus for so long now. I'm sorry, AUG players, but I'm not sad to see it go if it does not make it to high end Mythic Plus next season.
Let's hope.
Um, but the last thing that I wanted to touch on, so we have two things down. The Cersei Circlet stuff, which we'll go into very quick. It's been out, so we don't need to cover this in depth. And then the only other thing that I have down that I wanted to talk about was Plunderstorm and TGP. We'll just cover that next week because that'll be a lot sooner to when those things are actually happening. So Cersei Circlet, again, the thing that Scott and I really hated about this when it released is it was time gating the good gems that you could put inside the ring, which essentially made it useless to anybody who needed those gems and you only had the like tank and healer or support ones that you had access to before, which was a problem. They removed that almost immediately. You could get all of them, and you can continue to level up your ring, and all is well in the world now. Um, I think with the only thing outstanding, Scott, that you've told me since you've been playing and I haven't, is the fact that it's a little bit of an interesting choice that you have to do the quest on your alt each week if you want to continue to level up your alt's ring. Now, that being said, there is catch up to this, but if you're keeping it up to snuff, you have to do it on both your main and your alt every week.
Yeah, I mean, and it's usually a very quick, simple quest. Like it's really not that big of a deal, but you still have to do it. This week's was like the first one that it was kind of a pain because normally it's just a quest. You go, you walk into the zone, you take a quest, you do the quest, you turn it in, you get the item that lets you upgrade the ring. For whatever reason, this week was the first one that they made it so you can't actually accept the quest until you do like the um world quest achievement in the zone, which is just basically do stuff in the zone until you fill up this bar. And then, because yeah, the way the cycle of the zone works is you have a bunch of weeklies and events in the zone. You fill up the bar, and then you can go to like the storm raged version of the zone, which has different mobs to fight and do more quests there. Well, for whatever reason, this week they made it so you had to go to that storm raged version to pick up the quest and do stuff there. So this is the first one that was kind of a pain for me because I was like, I gotta run around this island again on my alt and do it. I don't want to do this, but I did it. It's still not that time consuming, but yeah, it's a little weird. I almost feel bad for them with this because like I thought it was stupid to time gate the stones, but like upon hearing their explanation for it, it's like they had this like really cute idea where there were going to be three factions on the island, but also the island was going to get invaded by a rotating cast of three factions each week. And then so the reason why you couldn't get all stones each week is because some of the stones come from a different invasion force that's coming. And like from a lore perspective and a narrative perspective, like that's a fun, cute idea. I get it. Like, but like it came in conflict with us WoW players that are just like, I want it now. What
Yep.
do you mean I have to wait? That's stupid. I want it now. So like sometimes the lore people are probably just like, we put so much effort into this and nobody cares.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So ultimately, I think good changes though. The ring seems to be hitting at least somewhat the mark that they want it to be hitting, which is a good thing. We'll see how it goes into season 2. I think that's where it's going to be really telling.
Mhm.
Because like currently is a high item level item that's good for almost everybody. That
Yep.
was the intention. What we need to see is once that item level gets surpassed by other items, is it still going to be better than those higher item level items? That's typically where they miss the mark.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we'll see how that happens into season 2, I think.
I mean, I guess my only thought on this is that like the cantrips are not noticeable. So like I mean, I know they're on there and I know like again I can read a spreadsheet that tells me I'm doing more damage and healing than I would have been with another ring.
Yeah.
But like you don't feel that while you're playing the game. Like occasionally like one of the damaging cantrips like triggers like a lightning bolt that shoots out of your hand and lands on the enemy. I'm like, "Oh, that one just procced." Okay. But that's really all I ever notice. Like it's just it's kind of boring.
Does it visibly shoot out of the visible ring on your finger?
It might. I don't know. Like you can't tell what's going on in this game sometimes, man. It's just like stuff's happening. I don't know.
Yeah, but
Probably.
you have a ring on your finger now.
I've never once noticed that after
First
the first
time,
day.
first time ever. But all right, Scott. Well, I think that we should probably wrap some things up here. It'll give us a little bit to talk about next week. Plunderstorm and TGP are coming.
Yeah.
That's all I'm really going to say on that.
I think we'll have a
Uh,
lot to talk about next week because we'll have, I mean, the initial round
yeah,
of testing of the new dungeon. We'll have the raid testings happening this weekend, so we'll get to our first look at some of the raid encounters. So yeah, I think we'll have a lot to talk about.
I'm trying to remember. Plunderstorm comes out not next week, but the following, right? The week
I
of the
think
20th.
I think that's correct. Let me
So that'll be fun times.
January 14th.
Oh, comes
So
out next
oh
week.
no, it's neck. Yeah, it's Tuesday. Neck. Yeah. Wow.
Well, we'll record before then, but just know the day after we record, I will be playing Blunderstorm pretty exclusively. So we'll have a lot to talk about there. But anyways, for this episode, that's all we really have for you guys today. And the question that I have for you guys this week is, now that the new year's here, what are your goals in World of Warcraft? I know a lot of people have kind of stopped playing, but maybe you're playing a different version of the game. Like myself, I was playing hardcore, still am. So yeah, let us know what your goals are for the new year. And as always, you can contact us at yellingintothevoidwow@gmail.com. YouTube is at Yelling Into the Void Wow, and Twitter is at Into the Void Wow.
If you are not already subscribed to this podcast, we please encourage you to do so to make sure you never miss an episode. It's going to be exciting ramp up to season 2. We're going to have lots to talk about, and we don't want you to miss it. So you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else in the world there are podcasts.
And then last but not least, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting on the YouTube video. All of this helps us get more exposure, get introduced to new people, and continues to let us do what we are doing here. So I think that's about it, though, guys. We will see you next week. We are not taking 2 weeks off this time, so we'll see you next week. And until then, we'll just be over here yelling into the void.